Lucy, what do you need, like 5 minutes? Well, you can do it now because I'm going to do it. Yeah. Hold on.
Thanks, can you hear me? Test, test. Yeah, it says you're unmuted. Adam, unmute, give me a test.
What's that?
Okay, thank you. I think everyone can hear me. Try on your phone, thanks.
All right, how about now?
Yeah, got you.
All right, the computer, the headset must not be picking it up. I was talking to you for a second. Hold on 1 second. All right. How many people do we have in here? I hate that. I hate when that fucking computer doesn't work. Oh. You guys hear me? Check, check. Hello, hello.
Check, check,
no.
check.
Okay.
We got you.
Right. Hey, Troy, good morning. All right. So my questions for today's conversation. How many people do we have in the group right now? How many people are in here? I can't see on my, I hate this. Right, I can. Oh, 24. Oh, a small group today. Where is everybody? Where are you? Where are all y'all? Okay. Hey, Gibber, can you hear me? Or Guyber, how do I say your name? I asked yesterday, but I don't think you could hear me yesterday. How do I say your name? Is it Gibber or Guyber? I just want to be able to pronounce it properly. And by the way, welcome to our group. As I was saying yesterday, I think that one of the things that you are going to see, besides the fact that what I'm talking about, the opening ranges, is that that what we do, what we're trying to provide in the PAX group is much different than what I think that most other people are This is, I eat what I, as Ira says, I eat what I cook. And as evidence today, sometimes not so damn well, but sometimes very well. Okay, here we go. G is like he, so, oh boy. Heber. Heber? Is that it? Oh, please tell me I got it. Heber?
Heba.
Heba or Heber? Am I saying it like it's in Spanish? Okay. Heber, right? Oh. Heber? Is that close enough? No, I don't want close enough. I want to be able to say your name properly. Like Rhonda Reskin, I know how to say that. Heber. All right, so anyway, Heber and Hamilton. And anybody else who's in our group that I haven't entered, that we don't know, that I don't know yet. Sarah. Pocket, is Sarah here or is that you? Ask Sarah if I can start to, if she can train me. All right, here we go. All right, you guys all have our updated, I updated the targets in Discord for the S&P, just on the upside, just in case we start to go forward. Rob, do you have any questions for Ira before he comes back?
I'm back.
Oh, hey, Ira.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. I'm going to ask you because I'm a little behind because I don't have, so we got to go quick to get through this. I just did an hour with Bookvar. I don't know how it's going to come out, but all right, let's go.
Okay. So I sent you some questions. There's a lot of them.
Wait, hold on. All right, now I got to go. Now I got to go to them. Hold on one second.
I can just rattle them off to you.
No, hold on. Let me see. Okay. I've got two Zoom things open here. Hold on. Okay. All right.
Ooh, thoughts on Judy Shelton? That's an interesting question.
Some question. Okay. That's okay. Are you okay?
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm talking to Lucy.
Your granddaughter?
Paul said they have tools, but what are they? I'm going down the list. Hell, I don't know what the tools are either. I know. I heard over and over again, tools, which would have prompted, as I put out in the blog the other night, if I was asking a question, my question would have been, well, what's your tool? So if you're trying to create inflation, right? Rhonda Reskin. I'm sorry. Steve Wallach. Love Steve. One of my favorites. Thanks, Rhonda. So if you're trying to create inflation, my question would have been, so wouldn't a weaker dollar be one of the tools in your toolkit? I'm going at answering this from the back door.
Yes.
And that's what I would have hoped some of these media people would have asked them, because to me, it's an obvious question, because historically, weak currency will help stimulate inflation. And if that's what your goal is, why aren't you doing it?
All right, so can I follow that up real quick? Because that goes to
please.
a question, that goes to one of my questions in the first email of questions. And it was, Ira, can you talk a little bit about the weakness in the dollar as an indirect or actually a direct form of stimulus? So, am I looking at it the right way?
Let's see, are you looking at it? Yes,
As
the
dollar stimulus, right?
You're looking at it. A weak dollar will stimulate, but not for what people think, by the way. I'm not talking about a trade issue. And that's where the media keeps falling on its head. And that on the podcast that I just recorded with Bookfire, I went after Philip Lane, who's the European Central Bank economist. When the euro was over 120, he comes out and starts talking about, the stronger euro is hurting. And I said, that's ridiculous, because actually I would argue that the stronger euro is actually helping Lagarde, because she gets to turn to the Germans and see, our policies are being well received by the market and they're taking the currency higher. So stop worrying. But there are those whose myopic views are the hobgoblins of little minds who only see it as a trade issue. But if my inflation is more than the depreciation of the currency, it's not a trade benefit anyway. So, you have to be careful with this. From the U.S. perspective and for the global perspective, because of the role of the dollar as a reserve currency, a weaker dollar helps stimulate global growth. That's why, and relieves some of the debt stress that is plaguing global, national, and local governments. They're carrying way too much debt, which is why, does anybody ever stop to think, I know Powell supposedly tried to explain himself why they push for 2% inflation. I really didn't get much out of his answer.
Me either.
Why does the Fed want 2% or above 2% inflation? Why? Why?
I was going to ask, that was another part of my question that I wanted to ask you because I don't have any idea.
Well, Irving Fisher and a lot of the Austrians did work in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s on the monetary illusion. And Milton Friedman did a lot of work. So when you create inflation, so if prices go up 6%, you're able to raise your price to 6%, and you've had debt that you've incurred. Well, you have the illusion that you're really you're making more money, but you're not. You may have raised your prices 10 cents for something, but you're paying more for what goes into it. So, but your debt becomes minimized because let's say I borrowed $1 million and all of a sudden over the next 3-4 years, there was a 20-25% inflation. I was able to raise my price. My debt hasn't been repriced, so I'm paying back my debt with cheaper dollars. Because you always have to ask yourself, well, what are they chasing? What are they going after? They really, at the bottom line, an academic economist will tell you what they're trying to prevent is a deflationary spiral getting out of control. That's why they want inflation. Okay.
Still doesn't help me understand it. You
have to ferret these out because we're not there's nobody here who I'm talking to is running, well, I don't know that. I shouldn't say that. But you're not really running a business. Most people here are interested in trading and doing things financially. Right?
Yep.
So that's what we want to figure out, how to confront what the Fed, this path that they're going on. And I thought Powell's press conference yesterday was phenomenally dovish. The Financial Times had a column that they thought, it wasn't dovish enough because basically he didn't actually invoke yield curve control. But my two questions would have been to him about the dollar, that I know you're not supposed to talk about the dollar, that's the Treasury's bailiwick, but from a monetary standpoint, would a weaker dollar help to spur inflation and get there faster to the target you're looking for? And if that's the case, the corollary should have been, well, so if you start to get inflation and long-term yields start to rise, are you going to invoke yield curve control to keep those under control? And then I could have folded up my tent and gone home because that's all I really need to know from a trader standpoint.
That's all we need to know from a trading standpoint, but yeah.
Listen, your politics or anything else, honestly, I don't care about.
Right.
Nor should you care about my politics. That's not what we discuss this for. We discuss this to look for, trading opportunities.
And there's been plenty of those.
Oh, yes,
Whether
and
we're-
there will be more as you listen to Mr. Powell. And of course, all the other central banks, because last night the Bank of Japan had their meeting, and this morning the Bank of England, and it's like they go to Kinko's and get the same statement.
Are Kinko's still open?
I'm making a joke.
So was I. We're so old that I don't even know the difference. But anyway, all right. There is a lot to unpack in everything that you just said there, and
Oh yeah,
1,000
No
thoughts
question.
swirling through my mind. Huh?
there was a proverbial lot there to decipher from. But here, I can give you, because I take notes, I sit and listen to it, and then I go back and listen again to see if there's something I should have missed. But he said, we'll be far along in the recovery, and these policies will still be in place. Again, so here, I know somebody wrote blah, 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 about, so they are a social justice organization because they are not going to stop their, as I joked in the blog the other night, jobs are the Fed's priority job one, like the old Ford commercial. That's where they're at. So for us, how much inflation will they sustain, and how will they downplay it when they have to because they're not at the job levels? And again, the social justice aspect comes in because, again, I started citing this 4 or 5 months ago because as soon as Powell started talking about through no fault of their own, that's social justice.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not only on a 3.5%, although it's not a hard target, a 3.5% unemployment level, they have to be the right people getting the jobs. Now he said that if you want to bat heads with me, I'll go bat heads with you. But he talked about blacks and Hispanics. And
Yes, he did.
believe me, again, from a moral perspective, I have no problem. I just don't want my Fed chairman to be a moral, my Fed chairperson being a moral philosopher.
What tools do they have at their disposal to be able to affect change in the job rate, especially when it comes to African American and Hispanic joblessness right now?
They're what they see is what they saw prior to this, because again, before the onset of the pandemic, Powell was crowing literally as a rooster would crowing. And he felt good about it. And believe me, Trump was riding the same wave. That black and Hispanic unemployment had been the lowest in 40, 50 years, and their wage gains were better than they were. That's just prior to this. So that's where they want to get back to. That's that's, as he says, that's not a hard target, hard and fast target. That's just something that they're aspiring to.
But what can they do? What can the Fed do specifically to affect that change?
Well, years ago, and they still could because of the way that they regulate the banks. So when housing was an issue, and believe me, I have the political scars because I did a lot of demonstrating and a lot of work on open housing issues back in the 70s. They could have prevented redlining. They didn't. So what can they do now? As he says, they have macroprudential tools. They could go in, and if they found that there were financial institutions who were redlining or preventing or charging higher fees to minority, whatever, they can go in and really make life miserable for them. But outside of that, no, I don't see anything.
So just a lot of talk, short of yield curve control.
Well, it's a bully pulpit. Yeah, and they have yield curve control. But I'm not sure what the outcome of yield curve control will be, because everywhere I've seen it, you know, it hasn't been good. The Japanese, and I was on with Santelli when the Japanese announced that they were doing that. And I said, that's a miserable idea. You want to do it, let the long end flow freely so you have a sense of what your policies really are, and do what the Australians are doing, and just buy everything up from 3 years and in. You know, that's what the Australians have done, and it's controlled everything anyway. They don't know the way they want to go, but the United States has so much long-term debt. That's what scares them. That'll do it. And with it will be the inflation that he's dreaming about at night.
If we achieve that inflation target and they're able to somehow effectuate change in Black and Hispanic unemployment rates, isn't that going to clog the system with just a tremendous amount of over-leveraged debt that will end up collapsing?
Yeah, but nothing cures that like inflation, my friend.
Yeah.
The monetary illusion. Write it down, tattoo it on your forearm, because that's and you should really go Google it and look at some of the Austrians' work. It really, some of them wrote very well. Ludwig von Mises, they wrote, Milton Friedman actually writes very well too for economists. Most of my, I think it's an aberration, but also get your copies. This is an advertisement of the new book out on the biography on Prime Minister Abe. You can order it. It's coming out in the U.S. You can get it electronically, but it will be available October 1st. It's written by my son, not the basketball player Tobias Harris, but my son Tobias Harris. He writes beautifully, very readable, and it'll take you through the history of Shinzo Abe. And it just worked out that the book got published as he resigned. So it's, it is picked up a lot of attention because of that. But very interesting.
I am buying it, downloading it as we speak right now.
Right. That's good.
All right. So you had mentioned debt, and that brings us to another question that Chris Pauley had. Let's see if I can find that. With about 250 trillion of global debt outstanding, and this is super interesting. Much with negative interest. What happens to the markets and global financial system when inflation and rates start to rise in or before 2023?
Well, you'll get yield curve control. That's why that yield curve control is such an interesting point. And when you see it, if they were to, if interest rates were to start to rise on the long end, let's see what we're doing today. Now, they've been floating around here, and Matt, you know as well as anybody, I love the curves.
Yes.
Actually, first yield curve trade this week. I actually bought the 30s and sold the 5s on Tuesday, I think, because it had run a little bit and I caught a little runner, and then it corrected yesterday after Powell spoke.
Yes, it did.
The market was looking for more on yield curve control, but no question was really asked. Actually, the last question by the guy from Yahoo was good, but he didn't follow it up. He just kind of let it hang out there about long-term, would the Fed increase their purchases of the long end? And Powell, yes, but he should have followed, well, what about if inflation, there was a follow-up question to there that would have really been, it was the last question, so if you want to go back and re-listen to it. So they didn't get enough, so the curve actually steepened during the press conference and all the way to the market Globex settlement at 4 o'clock. And then when the stock market was under severe pressure last night, they started buying the long end because it's just what they want to do. And it's actually stayed pretty big. So yeah, the curve is not doing much, but we did get some movement. But the fact that I made my first yield curve trade in months this week, I'm where everybody else is. So that's a really good question for me, because I'm going to be playing there just to see how far we go. Now, the Fed comes And don't forget, they're still buying 120 billion. I'll say that again, 120 billion of assets a month. So their ability to harm you, and treat all of this only as a trade right now, because they can make your life plenty miserable and bring some real hurt. So they will squash it if they deem that. So I'm not looking. If you saw inflation, that's my question has been since May that when we go into December, the operative point for me is going to be, what if you have 9% unemployment? And I thought that was actually very optimistic. Now we're at 8.4, but we'll see what happens over the next 2 months. But if you have 9% unemployment with a 6% annualized inflation rate, would the Fed raise rates? Would there be discussion of raising rates? And now we know absolutely, positively not.
Nope.
Right?
Yeah. Now we've got the actual answer.
So does that answer the concern about the curve?
Yes, it does. It does. And that's an interesting, I was looking at it yesterday and we were kind of talking about it, which is why we're, so many kind of direct questions or indirect questions this time about the yield curve, especially in my mind, just looking at the bid in the 30-year and then the sell-off going into the Fed. It was a 1.5 break. I mean, that was a nice sell-off. That was a very nice trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you, I think we're going to get a deal out of Washington. What do they call that group of the moderates, both Republicans and Democrats, who are meeting? And that's where the work is getting done. So I think you're going to get a deal for about $1.4 trillion, $1.5 trillion. And they could have done this all along, but it's political silly season and everybody is trying to stake out their advantage. Pelosi was absolutely wrong. And again, not a word I say is political. This has nothing to do with being a Democrat. I don't care. I care about policy. But she overplayed a hand searching for $3.5 trillion. They were never going to get that because Trump was never, the brunt of that money was to go bail out places like Chicago, Illinois, Democratic strongholds that are in terrible fiscal straits. And the Republicans were never going to, and Trump was never going to sign on for that because they don't, you know what? To quote, what's that famous line from James Baker?
Now yous can't leave? No, wrong James Baker.
James Baker, when he was he was chief of staff of Reagan's White House or Bush's White House, and they were talking about
never let a good Christ go to waste.
No, and he said the Jews won't vote for us. He says, "Fuck them, they don't vote for us anyway." That's a famous line.
Holy shit! I didn't know that.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I happen to respect him, and I respect him for saying that because he's fucking right. It didn't bother me. Fuck them, they don't vote for us anyway. You know what? And that is actually Trump's response. Why am I going to sign on to that deal? Yeah, it might be good for the economy, but any economist will tell you there's a lag effect, so it won't matter anyway. So why am I going to give you that optic? Just like Pelosi wasn't going to give him the optic of a $1 trillion agreement. Not $1.5 trillion, which they could have gotten from day one.
Now you've got on that deal. There was there's an article out on Zero Hedge talking about Trump letting Pelosi off the hot seat by tweeting that the Republicans ought to consider a higher that the Republicans ought to consider coming up a little bit. Basically, I think
that's that group that they put together. I forgot what they call them. It's a bunch of people who I actually respect, both sides of the aisle, who could have gotten this done, but were told not to get. They were meeting the whole time anyway, because they were afraid of basically having nothing. It would have gotten done. It would have gotten done anyway. But here's where Pelosi made a gigantic mistake. She overplayed a hand, and because they were pushing for large urban areas to be the recipients, uh, to be the recipient, she made Trump appear to be the one protecting Main Street.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. That optic is just there because everything that comes out of his mouth is about that, and that. Whether it's reality or not doesn't matter. We know that. So she overplayed it, and Trump knows he's got her, and she knows that she's cornered her. So she's got to come away with a deal. So he is trying. See, it's a smart move. It's what he did with Gavin Newsom. For the last 2 weeks, he's actually done things that are reasonable. So he's trying to leave that in people's mind, rather than being the obnoxious brother, who's got. You see, I always. Hold on one second. I'll call you. He's like the obnoxious little brother who's got to get you. I got you last. That's the way I look at Trump. He's an I got you last person. So
Yeah.
I know people whose families dealt like that their whole life. In my family, they just beat the shit out of me. Nobody says, no, I got you last.
That's how our family was too.
And I had 3 older brothers who would beat me up at any one time. No, I got you last. So, but that's the kind of Trump person is. That's the kind of person Trump is. He's not a guy. He's got to get the last word in. He's got to get the last punch in. He's got to. It doesn't matter. If he would stop doing it, he would appear far less obnoxious, and he'd be a little more easier to. But it's just his nature. So I kind of. What else can we get to?
I was just looking through some of the questions right now.
Okay.
And they're all, another question also, and this is from Alex actually, follow up is unemployment is high, yet everywhere I go, there are now hiring signs. Seems like the frontline low paying jobs are available, but no one wants to take it even though the unemployment benefits expired.
Well, again, what comes with them? How long will the job be for? It's easy to, it's like I look at when Monster or other places advertise jobs. I always go, it's like LinkedIn. LinkedIn sends me 100 things a week. People are looking at you. And you know what? I've never gotten one, and they have my resume because there's times I would like to have a big consulting job where I could still have the latitude to trade, but I would, listen, anybody who's listened to me, you either know, and I said I got a treasure trove of media hits, and of course, probably 2,000 or 3,000 or 2,500 blog pieces. There's a lot to go chase down if you want. So when you say you see jobs, yeah, but if I'm coming from a good job and I'm still not hungry enough, and I had a good job, I was in that group that Powell was crowing about, I'm not going to be so quick just to go grab it, because how long do I know this is going to be for? I have to be desperate. So have I reached that desperation? Now, my daughter, who's a chef in the restaurant business, we all know how, and she's down in Scottsdale, she just got a job via, what's the name of that site? Something D, what is that? Or something, but she had posted her resume. A pretty high level chef for 10, 11 years. And some guy who was looking to go private, meaning he had enough money, and he found her resume, called her, and hired her. I think, there's going to be major, that's why anybody who's looking for all these jobs is going to be, the food business is going to change dramatically, I believe.
Oh, I do too.
I believe. First of all, people are going to start thinking about just who's working in the kitchen and hygiene in the kitchen.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think of it that way. But I read something a week or so back about how there's to kind of piggyback on what Alex is saying and what Alex's question was, and what you're saying too is in the food industry there's a shortage of workers. so many people got laid off and lost their
Yeah.
jobs and either moved or whatever, you know, and so they're literally missing, they don't have enough workers to fill the void. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I didn't cite it because I don't know where in the hell it is, but interesting points anyway.
Yeah.
And I still don't understand. It's still so fascinating to me that the Fed is talking about maximum unemployment, yet they have what tools do they have in order to create jobs outside of directly lending money to Main Street? I suppose going back to the weaker dollar and to yield curve control, and also to the weaker dollar as stimulus, actually, you know, you keep the dollar weak, keep a glut of dollars in reserves so that they can lend to the banks. But if the banks aren't lending, what good does it do?
Well,
So
we're looking at it wrong, though. Sometimes it's better, just like with a trade, it's better to preserve your capital. So it's better to keep people employed than it is unemployed. So if you look at it then through that lens, does that make more sense?
yes, and dollars.
Yeah. So I don't want these people laid off, because laid off people, what happens? There's stress on their families.
Yeah.
There is stress on their living arrangements. There's all types of systemic stresses that I don't want them unemployed, and which was the whole thing with the initial CARES Act, was to mitigate those things. And look we've had rent forbearance, right? Just imagine the scene of people being evicted from their apartments all over the country. You want that scene? That would be the equivalent to soup lines in the early 1930s.
I was thinking that. But don't we have soup lines right now? Don't we have the soup lines with record numbers of people on food stamps, link cards, and hitting the food pantries all over the country? I saw something the other day in Chicago News where they, I don't know if it was the Chicago Food Depository, if it was another, but there was a shortage of food around Chicago for people that go to the food pantries and other places like that.
Hey,
so
what did Notes from Underground do in May? You remember?
No, well,
for St. Vincent de Paul.
Yes, Sturch, right. That's right.
Right? We raised, I'm not sure what the last total I had seen was 43,000. Now, as Mike told me over and over, he says, you don't know how much food that buys. He says, you don't know what $43,000 worth of food, you know, you're not talking exotic food, you're talking about staples. He says, you have no idea how much that is. So we bought semi-trailers full, and I was very proud of it because my readers stepped up, and there were people I didn't even know. One guy stepped up with $10,000.
Wow, that's beautiful.
You know, so people did serious things, and you know what? Let's see where this goes. But the people from St. Vincent de Paul and Marillac I got some very nice letters. That's not why I do it. It was let people, realize that they can really make a difference here. And you know what? I believe in the goodness of people. I mean, some days it's hard, but there are always those who will show up and show me things that I go, you know what? It was worth getting out of bed this morning. People like this make life worth getting out of bed. And that's going on. And yes, and Mike told me, that's why I did it, because in a conversation with him, he says, you have no idea how many people we have never seen before. He says, middle-class people struggling. This was in May. He said, we are being overwrought. And I said, well, let me see what we can do. And they were great, very grateful, because we were able to do something.
Yeah, and thank God for that. We've been trying to do with So many different things like this. They're now floating through my mind. But all right, so Adam has another question that stays along these
Yep.
lines.
I'll
What
take,
do the owners?
I'll deal with two more, and that's it.
Okay. What do the owners that rent the property do when they can't collect rent and they can't evict? Isn't that another sector of the economy that will suffer? Seems like such a domino effect.
It's phenomenally under stress. You know, that's why pay attention to what Chris Whalen from the Institutional Risk Analyst. Chris is he's probably the best out there on a regular basis writing.
Oh, I like Chris Whalen. Yeah.
On banks. So he's always worth a read. There is great stress in two areas, the commercial property market and the residential property market. And that's with all the forbearance. You know, we learned back in 2008 and 2009 during the housing debacle, and people learned. It takes a lot. And who just asked that question? I'm sorry.
That's Adam. Yeah, Adam is a major in U.S. Special Forces on active duty, but he's home in the States now.
Okay, Adam, that's really a very important question, because we learned during the housing crisis that it really took about 12 to 18 months to evict somebody out of their home. And okay, now that was a foreclosure deal. And people aren't stupid. They understand. So what did they do? They kept paying their credit cards because they needed their credit cards. So let's see, am I going to spend this $1,200 on rent, or am I going to pay down my credit card so I have it was a layup. Because I know you can't throw me out. Now, even with this, you know, don't forget, housing courts were closed for 3 or 4 months. So people figure out really quick where they have latitude. So I think that they've had some latitude, and then you've had rent forbearance because everybody's been screaming from the top of the mountain about it. But, you know, then I've talked to people who have, you know, kids, because, you know, my kids are, my daughter rents an apartment. She's 33, but her friends, you know, and I just was with one because her dad died. So I saw her 2 weeks ago and we were talking and what her situation was. And we've had these discussions, and people are making very real decisions. And these are people without kids. Imagine you have kids.
Huh.
And how long is it going to take to get you out of here? But somebody is absorbing it, or will absorb it. Because some landlords have said, well, you know, once this is over, I'm coming for the back rent. You know, the same with commercial real estate people in malls. And so it's a very good question. And how much will that be a drag going forward? And is Powell worried about that? Why didn't he tell us how worried he was about that? But again, you're only as good as the questions that come at you. So I'm not going to hold him. I'm going to hold, those are questions that should have been pursued. And we all would have been able to learn more.
Do you think that there were do you think that they're warned to not take their questions? Those who are credentialed are warned not to take their questions too far, push them a little bit too far like that?
I don't know. I would hope not, but I've been in enough, hell, I used to be at the CME meetings before we were a public corporation, when we were still just a member, you know, members, and they screened every question at the members meeting every year. Screened everything, you know, nah, we don't want to read that one. Nah, we don't. So, you know, and that led to people getting really frustrated. But
I remember
all the time. So
I remember.
I don't know what type of screening. I would hope not. I would hope not. Because it would depend on people being responsible enough and having enough respect, but still being able, like the two questions that I posed that somebody brought up in the questions, which I would have asked, which is one about the dollar, and then two, the question which would have been the yield curve control. I could have asked those very respectful, you know, again, it's the way you ask them.
the answer to those questions, I guess the reason that popped into my mind is because if somebody would have asked them, just, you know, how worried is he about commercial real estate or about or you know, just any of it, or going into the weakness of the dollar, or going into yield curve control, that would point Powell in, or that would paint him into a corner, and that would ultimately end up having a big reaction in the market when the algos are sucking out the keywords in the press conference, and they're listening to every and reacting to every word that he's saying. That would have ended up pushing the S&P into the 32 handle or the 31 handle even.
Yeah.
So that's what made me wonder, are they purposely trying to screen these questions, or at least keep them from going too directly into how worried he is, or you know, so you don't see things, you don't see the U.S. economy recovering for another 3 or 4 years. I forget what he said, but 3 years, right? Or 5 years?
Yeah, they took them, yeah. No, they were, you know what, first of all, because they're all from big media or significant media, so they seem to be respectful because they like to have their press credentials, and I guarantee you, not that the question is obnoxious, just, again, it's the way you ask.
Right.
It's all in the way you ask. It's not the question per se, you know. And if you make it about you, you know, are you going to be a you know, somebody out in the streets of Portland asking a question? No, you're going to be, you know. But as I've learned, my dear daughter, you know, I can't stress this enough. But my daughter Alexandra, who's really a very good journalist, we've had our conversations, but as she's taught me, the job of a journalist, a good journalist, is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comforted.
Boy, I love that.
I would afflict the comforted, and Jay Powell's comforted, and my job is to afflict, and I want to afflict them with serious questions, you know, that are going to, I think, enlighten. Because again, who do you you know, like when the woman from the New York Times is, who do you think your audience is? Who are you asking this question to, and what are you going to write in response? You know, that's always my issue. Writing for.
Yeah, who's your audience, and what are you trying to get across? Just the simple basics of any journalism class.
Yeah. What's your object here?
Let me ask you, Ira. Let me ask you just one more question before you skedaddle. We were talking. We had talked about this before, and I just want to get to make sure that we have it straight so that everybody hears it. In an FOMC meeting, the text of what Powell is going to say before the press conference is already out there, right? It's already known. So the market's already kind of reacted to it by the time he steps up to the podium. The major news outlets already have the text of what he's going to say, but what they don't have, and why the market always waits for the press conference, is they don't have the answers to whatever the questions are. Even if they have the questions ahead of time, they don't have his answers to them, and that's why the market reacts off of that. You had given us a brief synopsis before on how all of this stuff works, and how the news organizations get their news, and how they decipher, how the algos decipher it. You know, because we as traders are reacting to the price action. By the time the news trickles down to us, it's minutes later, and the markets have already reacted. You know, either violently or just kind of quietly. And so we have to focus on the price action and trade that in and of itself. But how news is released and how it's acted on by the algos is something that everybody's interested in, and nobody really has a clear picture on how it works. And we've talked about it before, so I was wondering if you can just give us a little bit of a tutorial on it now.
Well, here's what they go into lockdown. So I don't know what's going on now during times of COVID, you know, because don't forget, these are Zooms, and therefore the dispersion. So I don't know if they're getting it the way they were, although I don't know, was yesterday's news conference? Yeah, it was. I think it was Zoom.
Yeah, it was Zoom, yeah.
So I don't know that they're getting the statements, by the way. What they would typically do is they do get them, ahead of release so that under the guise that the media can transpose it and put out their story and, and not be lagging. I just thought that was, well, that's our take, but of course I get into trouble with certain people when I say that. So they get them, then they transfer, and that's how they were able to craft the headlines. And then you had a proliferation of new media outlets. You can go look at them. I'm on Forex News Factory right now. Forex Factory right now. I got robomarkets.com, never heard of it. I got a blog from the University of Oregon. Now, these don't all necessarily have press credentials. Reuters, definitely. CNBC, yes. There's some, but there's then of course there's tweets galore.
Yeah.
Then there's DW.com. Don't know what that is. There's a proliferation of news sources, and they get them, and then they craft the headlines to what, my sense is that they were doing them for quite a while to create the greatest amount of volatility. My sense of it.
Huh.
And I don't know what's going on right now because under COVID, the rules have changed. So they weren't getting them. In fact, they were upset. So I don't know what they worked out.
All right, that makes sense.
They were upset because, you know what? They weren't having the impact that they typically had. And there were others who were beating them to the punch because, they were faster and better and, they could freelance more than, somebody working for an established media outlet. So
we had talked about, we've covered a lot of ground today, and we talked about, and everything I think tied together pretty nicely. You had talked about your yield curve trade the other day. Is there do you have any feel for gold or any of the metals or any commodities?
Well, I'll tell you this. I truly think that if you get yield curve control on that day of an announcement, you will get a sell-off in the dollar.
Oof.
And a rally in some of the metals. That's just my sense of what's going to happen. Because I think and I could tell that because the Fed, that's one step beyond for them. They just do not want to go there.
Boy, that's sure.
It's almost like it's the nuclear option to me. That they have a lot of fears about it. First of all, because nobody understands it for the impact it'll have for a country that's the world's reserve currency. So you're already dealing with a different animal.
And with the inclusion of the yuan into the basket of SDR, the currencies of that backstop the special drawing rights with the IMF. So with the rise of the SDR, not as a world reserve currency, but with the rise of prestige of the yuan.
Yes, I have an article sitting right here that speaks to that, written by People's Bank of China head Yi Gang 2 months ago.
Ooh.
It's an interesting question. We're not, because that's going to take us deep into other things. That's
yes,
an
it will.
question. Hold that place, and we'll start there because. China has its own, the fact that China is pushing for greater dissemination of SDRs, well, for exactly what you say, that plays to China.
All right, when can we get together next?
One day next week.
All right, good. Well, thank you, Iris. Thank you so much for the time. I know that you're.
Yeah.
I'm
a little pressed today, but good questions. Really, you guys prep really well, so that I don't need the questions, but it just helps us go through smoother because we get off them anyway.
Yeah, we do, but they all tie back in together, and it is one big interesting ball of wax, and back to that, the Chinese curse that is not a blessing. May you live in interesting times. Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I don't know. I'm sure you guys are looking forward to getting back to Arizona and getting out of the city.
All right, I'll talk to you, Maddie.
All right. Thanks, Ira. Thank you so much. Have a
Okay.
great weekend. God bless.
Oh, good.